This is Radio 4, and now here's Margaret Howard with her Pick of the Week.
Hello again. I've often started Pick of the Week with those words, but is hello a proper form of address? It wouldn't do for everyone, according to Kate Adie.
Would you really say hello to the Queen? And do you spell it with an A, an E, or a U? Any gathering of Europeans resounds with confident cries of bonjour and buongiorno, interspersed with Anglo-Saxon muttering. Good morning. Hello. How are you? Good morning. No, good Lord, good afternoon. Doesn't time fly? There are variations crammed with insincerity. Nice to meet you. Good to see you. And somewhere comes the cry of the much-travelled transatlantic person, aye. Whatever happened to good day? A number of things in literary history, but the most significant one seems its wholesale transportation to Australia. And the greetings which have remained carry all the usual nuances and social pitfalls in which the British excel. One dictionary, admittedly a little dog-eared, solemnly informed me that hello is used mainly by those on the telephone. The implication was clear. Open a conversation with someone face to face, and you risk treating them as an instrument. But even though hello may have elbowed its way to more frequent use these days, its brevity and abruptness have caused it to acquire appendages. Hello, how are you? I have seen manuals for foreigners which have given stern warnings about this phrase. Do not in any circumstances, especially with the English, take these words to have any meaning. The English will regard it as grossly intrusive if you desire to know exactly how they are. On no account, should you be addressed with the inquiry, deliver an answer of either truth or detail. They will recoil at any mention of your gastrointestinal problems, and the seemingly innocuous reply, very well, thank you, is in some quarters considered vulgar.
Kate Adie reflecting on words on Radio 3. Kate's most recent big assignment was to the desert, where, complete with helmet and camouflage, she reported the war in the Gulf. Last weekend, the Queen attended the National Gulf Service of Remembrance and Thanksgiving, and to coincide with that, Radio 1 compiled a picture of the war through the eyes of the young men and women in the armed forces who took part in it, and those who watched them go.
Another Royal Navy ship left Portsmouth bound for the Gulf. HMS Cardiff is to replace HMS York, currently on patrol there.
Stood on the upper deck in Alpha while we pulled out, and all the well-wishers were waving literally all the way out of Pompey Harbour. But you stood there and, there's a feeling of disbelief, total confusion. What are we going out there? What's happening, I'm 20.
They stand along the rails so you can see them. Then the band plays. Now this is very touching. It makes you feel 10 times worse than you was before. The boat goes out sideways so you can see them go, and then a tug comes up and takes it off, and everyone stands and watches till it's a little dot in the distance.
I had a few relatives on the jetty, like Jackie was there. She was my girlfriend then. She was crying her eyes out as I walked up the gangway. I was the last one on the ship, I think. And walks away and she's saying, I love you and come back. And you can't answer back because you've got this big lump in your throat. And you're trying to get back on the ship, this big show of bravado, I'm all right, lads, look at me. No tears here. And all you want to do is literally start crying.
The day Sean left to go to the Gulf, I was so choked up. And I saw him to the gate. He said, well, you're not taking me out the station. Dad's taking me, you can stay in and sort yourself out. So I said, OK, then I can go shopping. Being all hard about it, And he went to get in the car, and he turned around and come back. He picked me up and threw me round, and he gave me an extra squeeze, and then he said, I'll catch you later then, Mum. So I said, yeah, OK. I said, don't forget, do as you're told. Don't forget to change your underpants every day. Don't pick your nose at the dinner table, and behave yourself till you get home. Just like that, And he said, I'm going to show you up rotten while I'm out there. And as he turned round, he had a little tear in his eye, and I was shaking. And I thought, I wonder if this is the last time that I will ever see him.
A Radio 1 programme called If Snowflakes Were Kisses, part of a quote from one serviceman writing home who said, if snowflakes were kisses, I'd send you a blizzard. There are many valuable letters and manuscripts held in the Library of Congress in Washington. Papers belonging to Abraham Lincoln and Walt Whitman are the sort of thing you might expect, but also stashed away in there is the correspondence of Groucho Marx. Tony Stavaker ferreted it out for a programme on Radio 4. With Frank Ferranti as the voice of Groucho, here's a sample dating from 1946. Warner Brothers, the picture corporation, was threatening the Marx Brothers with legal action over their plan to make a film called A Night in Casablanca. Warners themselves had just brought out a film called Casablanca and felt that entitled them to the copyright in the name.
Dear Warner Brothers, you claim you own Casablanca, that no one else can use that name without your permission. What about Warner Brothers? Do you own that too? You probably have the right to use the name Warner, but what about Brothers? Professionally, we've been brothers long before you were. We were touring the sticks as the Marx Brothers when Vitaphone was still a gleam in the inventor's eye. And even before us, there had been other brothers. The Smith Brothers, the Brothers Karamazov, Dan Brothers, an outfielder with Detroit, and Brother Can You Spare a Dime. This all seems to add up to a pretty bitter tirade, but I assure you, it's not meant to be. I love Warners. Some of my best friends are Warner Brothers. I have a hunch that this attempt to prevent us from using the title is the brainchild of some ferret-faced shyster, saving a brief apprenticeship in your legal department. Well, he won't get away with it. We'll fight him to the highest court. No pasty-faced legal adventure is going to cause bad blood between the Warners and the Marxes. We are all brothers under the skin, and will remain friends till the last reel of A Night at Casablanca goes tumbling over the spool. Sincerely, Groucho Marx.
The Groucho letters on Radio 4. Over on Radio 2, Bob Sinfield has been digging out some songs for swinging heroes, ranging from Davy Crockett to Queen Boadicea. Well, she's a heroine, actually, and so perhaps was Amelia Earhart, the celebrated flying ace. Bob had a tale to tell about her last flight that I hadn't heard before.
Her mysterious disappearance over the Pacific during an attempted worldwide flight was never satisfactorily explained, but this was the official version.
Just a ship out on the ocean, just a speck against the sky. Amelia Earhart flying out that day, with her partner Captain Noonan on the first day of July. She fell into the ocean far away, and there's a beautiful, beautiful field far away in a land that is fair. Happy landings to you, Amelia Earhart. Farewell, First Lady of the Air.
Red River Dave McHenry's interpretation of what became of Amelia, performed by the British group Plainsong. But their lead singer, Ian Matthews, wrote a piece called The True Story of Amelia Earhart, pointing out various holes in the accepted theory and echoing the one put forward by CBS newsman Fred Gerner.
They were captured and taken to Japan's military headquarters in the Pacific, Saipan. The kind of questioning and hardships they endured can be imagined. Death may have been a release they both desired.
30 days the Lexington and others searched the sea for pronouncing Earhart lost. It all was going smoothly and the senators relaxed. Amelia and Noonan paid the cost. Then a CBS man Gunner was confused by all the facts. He said there's someone telling lies. Amelia's plane was not the one they detailed in the news. The fuel tanks alone were twice that size. Oh, Amelia, it's true, you're the lady of the air. And this I'm not disputing anyhow. But if what Mr. Garner said is only half the truth, then Jesus Salas, one of many, he had no call to lie. He was working in the harbor that day. And Saipan was a wartime stronghold of the Japanese. And Jesus saw the flyers led away. So who's to point the finger more? So who's to say what's right? Me, I just wanted you to hear how brave Amelia Earhart, First Lady of the Air, and Frederick Newman ended their careers. Oh, Amelia, it's true, you're the lady of the air. This I'm not disputing anyhow. But if what Mr. Gore said is only half the truth, then Amelia, oh Amelia.
The True Story of Amelia Earhart, sung by Plainsong on Radio 2. It was more recent history that inspired the Soweto poet Mzwakhe Mbuli, who told the story of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa in a great elegiac ballad which was broadcast on Radio 1. With the addition of BBC Sound Archive material and the voices of the Amabuto Choir, Unbroken Spirit was a passionate, prayerful plea against racism.
What life could have been without capital punishment and hanging of compatriots. Imagine what life could have been without the execution of trade unionists, Mini, Mkaba, Kainga. What life could have been without the execution of Solomon Mahlangu and many others.
These people are even afraid to talk. If they talk wrongly, they get beat up. And their hanging, from what I know of British hanging, is nowhere near the same. They don't hang them the same as we hang them from the left. They hang them from under the chin. And constantly, day and night, they sing. The singing is not like jazz or pop songs or anything like that. It's tribal singing that they figure gets them prepared to meet their deaths. And it puts them in what one might say a trance.
This is the period up to their execution?
Yes. Before they're executed, they're warned 12 days beforehand. And after 12 days, they start this constant singing, day and night.
And then what about when they actually go to their deaths?
They hang them at 6 o'clock in the morning. The night before, the ones that they're going to hang, they put them in one cell, and they give them certain clothing that the guys before them wore. They tie their hands together behind them, and they walk them up the passageway, and you can hear them go by. You're within 50, 60 feet of them when they go by. They usually rattle the bars, they're singing. One might think they're happy, but they're really not happy at all. They're in this, like, trance that they've prepared themselves to go to their deaths, and I say like men.
They use leg irons, firstly, to bind you so that you're not in a position to move when they assault you physically.
What have we done, our Lord?
Secondly, they use them to tie you against the grill when you sleep during the night, so that they make sure that they're sure of your movements.
What have we done, our Lord?
But they use leg iron mostly as a contact for their electric shocking device. They attach electric wires on the leg irons, and therefore the circuit goes on from the right into the flesh. They use them also when they drown people in the sea. They bind their legs together and they dip them in the sea again and again.
The architects of this philosophy shall belong to the dustbin of history. Yes, the museum of shame.
Part of Unbroken Spirit on Radio 1. The music was composed by Richard Attry. Now for a love story. A romance between a dashing young English officer and a Romanian princess, said to be one of the most beautiful women in Europe. Michael Johnston presented Smiranda, scenes from a romance which took place between 1915 and 1930. Colonel Christopher Thompson, later Lord Thompson, played by Jonathan Hyde, had been posted to Bucharest as the British military attaché. Princess Mart Bibescu, played by Janet Suzman, moved in smart society in the Romanian capital, and it was inevitable that their paths would cross. It happened on March the 28th, 1915, at a concert in the royal residence.
When the music ceased, a couple descended from a gallery at the far end of the room. The man was King Ferdinand. The lady I'd not seen before, dressed in black velvet and wearing some splendid emeralds. She took a seat behind me, a little to the left, next to the wife of the Prime Minister. The two ladies were quite close, and I couldn't help hearing what they were saying. The elder one remarked in French, "I believe that English colonel has an eye in his left ear with which he's looking at you."
I began by feeling distrustful. I thought the appearance of the stranger, his soldier-priest air, was no more than the effect of the full dress uniform. His hands were crossed on the pommel of his sword. The length and extreme fineness of those crossed hands gave me the strange feeling that if their owner struck with his sword, he could also heal the wound, merely with the touch of those hands.
Later on, I secured an introduction to the lady with the emeralds. She talks English with an accent that is delicious, and knows more about the British Museum than I do. I am really most unobservant. Though we were talking for at least half an hour, I didn't notice the color of her eyes, but the lashes are exceptionally long and dark. They hang like willow branches over a pool. I am feeling more reconciled to exile now than I have felt at any time since leaving London. It's pleasant to escape from the city and spend a quiet hour in her garden at Mogoshoia. More a demesne than a garden, an enclosed space containing a strip of woodland, a ruin, a lake of sleeping waters, outbuildings, a chapel, and a house on three sides of a courtyard. I found a suitable name for the chatelaine which suggests some of her attributes. Smiranda. The word means emerald.
As you drew nearer, it seemed to me that the knight-errant of the fairy tales was riding towards me, bounding from the forgotten pages of my books. And so, dearest Kate, I must tell you that what you have made plain with such sweet tact in your last letter, I return to you with a sentiment and an esteem no less sincere. You write of warm affection. My knight-errant. These are the very words I would use in your case. To find myself on the Danube with you will be a joy.
Oh, not a dry eye in the house. Smiranda on Radio 4. Well, romance tends to get a rougher ride with Alan Ayckbourn. Over the bank holiday, we were treated on Radio 4 to the Norman Conquests, a radio version of the Ayckbourn trilogy, first produced for the BBC World Service by Gordon House. The three plays can go in any order and concern the same event and the same people, but from different points of view. Norman, played by Robin Herford, is a bit of a ladies' man. He's married to Ruth, but had planned on a dirty weekend with Annie, who would really have preferred to have gone away with the rather limp vet, Tom. The plan was scotched anyway by Sarah, played by Tessa Peake-Jones, whose henpecked husband, Reg, was keeping himself well out of the way as she waded into Norman, drunk on dandelion wine in the garden.
Present company accepted. The trouble with the men in this house, and I include your husband, is they allow themselves to be trampled on by the giant feet of their cow-elephant spouses.
Whose fault is that?
Just because Reg happens to be a very gentle, friendly soul Just because Tom happens to be a man who's never had an aggressive thought in his little head doesn't mean it's a cue for every woman in sight to bounce up and down on them like nubile lady trampoline artists. What have you done to him? Look at him, in there. Little Reg in his pinny, busy with his little Bridget brush, polishing away. Polishing the plates for dear life because Sarah said so.
While you're lying out here stinking of drink.
That's a man's role, to lie about stinking of drink.
You don't like me, do you?
I don't dislike you. You're like my old athlete foot. You make me irritable.
I see.
I'll tell you. When I was at my primary school, mixed infants, we had a little girl just like you. She was very pretty, very smart and clean, beautifully dressed, always a nicely starched little frock on, nicely ironed bow in her hair, butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. And she ran that little school with more sheer ruthless efficiency than the head of the mafia. She asked you to do something for her, and you did it. You never argued. And there was no use trying to thump her either. She had seduced all the best muscle in the place. She had a bodyguard 5 deep. And for some reason, she took a real dislike to me. She made my life murder. I was terrified to go to school. I used to pretend to be sick, to hide, anything rather than go. And then, one day, in the holidays, she came round with her mother to our house to see my mother. A sociable tea and chat. And they sent us 2 out on our own to play together. And suddenly there we were. Not in the school, which was definitely her territory, but on mine. And we stood there and we just looked at each other. And I thought, what am I frightened of you for? A skinny little girl with knock knees and a front tooth missing. So I picked her up, like this, under one arm, and I carried her right down to the bottom of the garden by the rubbish tip. She never made a sound during this, not a word, nothing. And I found the biggest patch of stinging nettles find. And I pulled down her knickers and sat her right in the middle of them. And she sat there for a very long time, just looking at me, weighing me up, you know. Then she got up, pulled up her knickers, very quietly took hold of my hand, gave me a big kiss, and we went in and had our tea. I've never been in love like that again.
And that, I think, is probably the secret of Norman's conquests, part of Round and Round the Garden by Alan Ayckbourn. Ever since Eve, women have been blamed for a lot of things, mostly by men. In the past, they've often been rather too ready to shrug off their responsibilities as regards women, many of whom have been left, literally, holding the baby. In a poignant programme on BBC Two, women who had had illegitimate babies in the period between the wars told their stories. In those days, pregnancy outside marriage meant that you were a social outcast. Indeed, many of these women were thrown out of the house by their parents for bringing disgrace on the family, though some of them barely understood what had happened to them. They had to have their babies in institutions, and they were expected to give them up for adoption.
Then they told me it was going to be adopted the next day. It was going into a home for adoption. So, well, I didn't answer. I just didn't say anything. I just thought about it. I didn't care. I hadn't seen the baby. I didn't love it because I hadn't held it. I hadn't seen it. It just didn't bother me. So, but during the night, after they'd all gone and I was cleaned up and made comfortable, as I told you, it was a bitterly cold night, and I saw the little blue hand come out of the little shawl, little tiny blue hand, little fist. And I thought, poor little thing, it's cold. I'll take it to me and get it warm. They won't know no different. No, they wouldn't, but I did. That was it. I couldn't part with it. No, I just couldn't.
One of the women in a programme called In Disgrace in the BBC Two series, A Secret World of Sex. Sex was a pretty secret business in the reign of Queen Victoria. By all accounts, the Queen herself enjoyed it, and she certainly produced a fair number of children. Her descendants are scattered throughout European royal houses, and a lot of that was to do with her interest in matchmaking. There was one daughter, though, that the Queen wanted to keep at home, her beloved Princess Beatrice. How she managed to avoid the fate of being a spinster was told in the second of Neville Teller's explorations into the family life of Queen Victoria, with Wendy Hiller in the part of Her Majesty and Alan Wheatley as the narrator. The Queen's matchmaking was only moderately successful, but she was firm in this matter.
Russia, I could not wish for any of you.
In the Queen's view, it was entirely appropriate that an unmarried daughter should devote her life to caring for her mother, and she began to dread the possibility of one day losing her. So Beatrice was forbidden to dance with anyone, and the word wedding was banned in the royal household. In 1883, Beatrice suffered an attack of neuritis and went to seek a cure at Aix-les-Bains. The Queen wrote to the Empress Augusta,
Beatrice's absence is very grievous and unpleasant, and increases my depression and the horrible, ever-growing feeling of emptiness and bereavement, which nothing can ever really remove.
While the preparations for the wedding of the Queen's granddaughter Victoria were at their height, a family scandal suddenly erupted, involving the bride's father and a divorcee, a Russian lady, to add insult to injury. With the Queen's attention diverted by these family matters, Beatrice gave her heart to the youngest Battenberg prince, Henry, known as Lico. For many weeks, the Queen refused to discuss the matter. In the end, seeing the effect on her daughter, she agreed to Lico's visiting England, and an accommodation was reached. To the Duke of Grafton, she wrote,
The Queen thanks the Duke of Grafton very much for his kind letter and good wishes for her beloved daughter Beatrice's betrothal. The Duke has known her from her birth, and knows therefore what a devoted daughter she has ever been. He can therefore understand that it would have been quite out of the question for her ever to have left the Queen, and she would never have wished it herself, knowing well how impossible it was for her to leave her mother. Prince Henry of Battenberg is, however, ready to make England his home, and the princess will continue to live with the Queen as heretofore. He is very amiable, very unassuming and sensible, and in addition, very good-looking.
In spite of the fact that he volunteered to live permanently with his mother-in-law, the Queen felt abandoned, and the feeling became stronger as the date of her daughter's wedding grew closer. The Queen thought of it as the fatal day. But all turned out well in the end. Not only was the wedding itself a great success, but the unpromising ménage à trois actually seemed to work.
The home life of Queen Victoria. Bank holidays bring out the strangest things in people, and last Monday produced a rash of teddy bears on Radio 2. It was picnic time for Giles Brandreth, who was down in the woods watching a whole galaxy of bears gadding about. One of them was waving the Stars and Stripes.
And I can see now, yes, it's Teddy Roosevelt Bear himself. The teddy bear, of course, owes his name to President Theodore Teddy Roosevelt, 25th President of the United States. Back on the 14th of November, 1902, Roosevelt was on a hunting expedition in Smeads County, Mississippi. Anxious that the president bag a bear, some of his party chased down and stunned a small black bear. The hunters roped the animal and tied it to a tree. A messenger was dispatched to summon the president so that he might shoot the bear and go home with a trophy. But when Roosevelt arrived, he declined to shoot the tethered creature and declared, "Spare the bear." Well, the next day, the Washington Post informed the nation, the president called after the beast had been lassoed, but he refused to make an unsportsmanlike shot. Well, the moment was immortalized in a cartoon, words spread across the nation, and soon the president was approached by a shopkeeper who said, "May I manufacture a toy bear and call it Teddy's bear. And so the teddy bear was born.
Giles Brandreth on the birth of the teddy bear. Well, I've had some funny things on this programme over the years. Juggling, ballet dancing, action painting, hair sculpting. But I don't think we've ever had a bird sculpture.
I'm going to get into a much more kind of practical, Clyde built sort of sculpture by radio, and I'm going to tell you how to build your own Berlin bird. B-U-R-D, by the way, none of this bird stuff, it's bird, right? Okay.
That's fair.
So do you want to know how to build a bird?
Yes.
Right, get your notebooks and pencils ready out there, folks. Here we go.
Stand by your tables.
Take a wee piece of wood, 3/4 inch thick, 2 inches long, 1.5 inches wide. You can do it in centimetres if you want. Now, on the long edge, mark off 3/4 inch and cut off a piece at an angle to the corner of the bottom edge. You now have a rhomboid. Turn the wood upside down and drill 2 wee holes the same diameter as a coat hanger wire. These are for sticking in the legs. Another hole now in the straight front at the bottom for sticking in its stick. Now, unravel a coat hanger and cut 3 pieces of wire, each about 10 inches long. Take 2 of the wires and bend their ends into claw shapes and push the other end into the holes in the bottom of the wood. Give the legs a wee crank in the middle to satisfy the ornithologist. Take the other piece of wire and bend one end into a beak and stick it in the other end into the hole in the flat front of the bird. Bend it into a curvy neck shape like an ostrich so as it can see over a wall. On the side of the bird, write, "A bird is not a stone." That's it. You now have your own Berlin bird. Any questions?
Yes, well, quite a few, but I don't think I've got time for them now. That was George Wiley, a well-known character north of the border, on Radio Scotland's Queen Street Gardens programme, presented by Louise Batchelor, which this week came from the bar of the Tron Theatre in Glasgow. And after all that frivolity, it's time we had an improving sermon from Philip Spence, the vicar of St Mark's, Newnham in Cambridge.
In a moment, you're going to hear a Bible story, and this is the main character. Let's see whether you can guess who I'm going to draw. Start off with the nose. There's a big nose. Okay, it's always nice to start with the nose. He's a great preacher, so I'll give him 2 starey eyes like that. Okay? And lots of hair. Actually, now this is a clue for you. He never cut his hair. Lots of hair like that, and his mouth, since he's a preacher, his mouth wide open like that, and a huge beard coming in like this. Now, here's a clue as to who he might be. He's a preacher, okay, he's putting something into his mouth. There is his hand, he's got wings, and there it is. Okay, any ideas yet who it might be?
John the Baptist?
Yes! I was an art student in Stoke-on-Trent, and my tutor was J.W. Taylor, who was a very famous cartoonist. He's dead now, but he was very famous. And I had the job of taking his cartoons to the local press every Friday night. And on the way, I hope this is just between you and me, you know, on the way I used to open it and have a look at it and then add a little bit. That was very wicked. And then when it was published, I'd say to my mum, I did that bit. So you might say that was the first time I ever had anything published.
A naughty vicar on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. Religion turns up in the strangest places. You wouldn't have expected to hear that the pop singer Paul Simon got his first big break in this country through a BBC producer in the religious department. Radio 1 has just started a series presented by Stuart Grundy called the Paul Simon Songbook, and it was there that I heard how Judith Piepi came upon the young Paul Simon performing in a club. She recognised an extraordinary talent and pestered the man at the BBC to do something about it.
In the widest sense, Paul's songs are religious. And I nagged them, and I said, look, you can't let this leave the country without something staying here. This is the greatest songwriter of our time. No, you haven't heard of him. Nobody has bloody heard of him, you know. But something's got to be done. And I kept phoning them, I mean, sort of 3 times a day, generally driving everybody up the wall. I can be quite horribly persistent, you see, when I think there's something worth being persistent about. In the end, Roy Trevivian turned up, and of course once he'd listened to Paul, he knew there was something, you see, so he got an hour's studio time. We went to the BBC, and Paul recorded a dozen songs in this hour, I mean straight off, and then I did short commentaries to fill in the time between the length of the song and 4 minutes 40 seconds.
This important exposure to the millions who just listened to Housewife's Choice was a crucial stepping stone in Paul Simon's career.
recorded on January the 27th, 1965, and long thought lost. The complete one-hour session has recently been unearthed, and the following extracts are being heard for the first time in 26 years.
I can recall reading in a paper once a short little piece about a man who had committed suicide. It was about 4 lines long, and I thought it was a rather bad elegy for someone who was obviously so oppressed with life that he flung it away. So it prompted me to write this song. Hope it's a better elegy than the 4 lines in the paper. He was a most peculiar man. That's what Mrs. Reardon says, and she should know. She lived upstairs from him. She said he was a most peculiar man. He was a most peculiar man. He lived all alone, within a house, within a room, within himself. A most peculiar man. Could I hear a little of that back?
Across fine, Paul. Quite fine.
The Paul Simon Songbook on Radio 1. Now here's something for all those men who say they don't know how to boil an egg. It's not just women's work, it's a serious scientific endeavour, especially if you want to get it just right, with the white firm and the yolk runny. Professor Nicholas Curti is a physicist and an expert in cryogenics, which has to do with the study of low temperatures. You need a fairly high temperature to boil an egg, though, and when Leslie Forbes joined the professor for Radio 3's Table Talk, he had water on boil, which he said must be 59 degrees and not more than 62 for that perfect egg.
Now here is an egg, you see, that's a nice ordinary 2-size egg. I drilled a little hole into it and then stuck into it a thermometer. It's a very fine needle with a little so-called thermocouple in it, and this thermometer measures the temperature of the center of the egg. Now I must turn this one on, right, and I just set the 0, it's almost set. In it goes, oops, now we can chat.
You could probably explain to me, this is about low temperatures rather than high temperatures, why it is that bull sperm freezes with no problem whatsoever, but a strawberry, when it's frozen, comes out a flavourless mush.
Exactly. You see, it's relatively easy to freeze very tiny biological material, but not strawberries. I quite agree with you, and all those people who said that you can freeze whole bodies, you know, the so-called cryonics people. I asked them, look, what happens if you take a strawberry? What happens if you take a human being?
Well, with a mushy brain.
Exactly.
It's great, it looks like an electric egg, the way it's got that plug on the end of it.
But what I do after 4 minutes? At 4 minutes I know the white is all right. I then take this out of this boiling water and put it in the big pot which contains water at 60 degrees. And lo and behold, you will see the temperature of the yolk will slowly increase because it still gets heat. It can never get above 60 because the surrounding water is 60. You see, it cannot get hotter than the surrounding water. On the other hand, I found that after about 10 minutes, it had spent long enough time at 60 for salmonella to be dead. There is no salmonella in this egg, by the way. I didn't put any in.
Professor Nicholas Curti. Dirk Bogarde is boiling his own eggs these days. Back home in London, after many years in Provence, he seems to have taken out the copyright on remorse. In a piece he'd written called A Short Walk from Harrods, he told of his new life in the shadow of Peter Jones, where the local ladies love to lionize him at their dinner tables, while he prefers to fend for himself.
My shop is still open. I take a wire basket and wander in, wondering what to eat for my supper. Fraught business, this. Tin of soup? Easy. No mess, 1 dish to wash. Perhaps some ham, Cold ham, boiled potatoes? perhaps a bit of chutney. I realised, muttering to myself. I tripped over one of those blasted shopping trolleys, easily tartan, which elderly ladies drag behind them in supermarkets. The woman in the plum cloth coat and pudding basin hat glared at me as if I'd attempted to snatch her bag, shrugged off my apology, and turned back to her companion, a thin woman in a knitted beret. "She was saying," she said to the plum cloth. "Well," I said to him, "well then," I said, "what's that lump doing there? Wasn't there lunchtime? Very nasty it looks. Very nasty. You go to Boots Cash Chemist and get something to put on it." "Get lost," he says, "silly old cat." My own child. My own flesh and blood. Flabbergasted I was. Listening with curiosity to the conversation behind me, I was all unaware of mounting irritation from the woman next to me. She tried to push hard at my wire basket with her own. "You frightfully mind." We'd crossed the Great Divide. There'd been no democratic encounter here between her mushroom hat, well-cut silk dress and tight grey hair, and my aged anorak and dirty jeans. I didn't budge. I willed her to have another bash at my basket, and this she did, swinging at mine like a demolition ball and chain. "I did ask you to move. I am trying to shop." "And I, madam. I was here before you, and I know exactly what I want, so..." "And I do. Exactly." A youth hovered about behind the glass counter. She raised a jewelled fist to summon him. "Young man, here. Smoked salmon, Scottish, not farmed, 8 ounces. She turned to me once again and demanded that I move. I said I would when I'd been served. This trivial and unseemly squabble had reached the point that I thought she might see fit to swing her basket at my head, but at that instant, Mr. Collinson, crisp in white apron, eyes sparkling with mischief, was quite suddenly in attendance. "Ah, my lord, there you are. What can we do for you today? Pie?" The mushroom hat and silk dress moved swiftly away. She stared at me, white with hostility. Mr. Collinson beamed at a minor victory. Behind me in the queue, a woman's voice said, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Gerald and I had to dine with them on Tuesday. They really won't do, you know. I mean, Christmas cards from Kensington Palace stuck all over the room in June."
Dirk Bogard on Radio 4's Reading Aloud. Woman's Hour celebrated the bank holiday with an all-girls-together edition on the subject of humour. Who says women can't tell jokes? Fidelis Morgan certainly can.
I was in a review at Richmond, and lots of the material we had was very bad, and the actors kept refusing to do it, and so we were going home ourselves and writing things and bringing them in. And I came in one morning with a review sketch, which was a monologue for myself, and it ended with a punchline. And so I got to the end, and I did the punchline, and all the other actors in the room all laughed and said, "Oh yes, that's great, we'll have that one in," except for another of the writers who sat in the room and said, oh no, you can't possibly have that. I mean, it's got a punchline." And I said, "Well, yes, it's a review sketch, you see." And she said, "Yes, but you've got to understand." And she said, "Yes, you see, it's symbolic, you know, of the male orgasm. Whoosh, and it's over." And I said, "Well, I'm awfully sorry, what do you want me to do, go on all night?" And she said, no, you must have more of a female rhythm, as you're a woman writer, that it should go, boop, 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 wee, boop, 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 wee, boop, 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 wee. And I said, "I'm awfully sorry, but I have a feeling that you've never come."
So much for coming. As for me, I'm going. You'll be getting male punchlines next week. I've enjoyed doing Pick of the Week all these years. Thank you for listening, and thank you for all your lovely letters. Goodbye now.
And a very fond farewell to Margaret Howard after more than 17 years of picking from the week. The producer was Piers Plowright. Next week, Chris Searle takes the chair.